Hello, my name is Nicholas Morgan. I'm an editor at Aval News, and this is Turkey Abroad. Joining me this morning is Dr. Yektan Turk Yilmaz. He is a research fellow at the Forum for Transregional Studies in Berlin, Germany. Yektan, welcome back to Turkey Abroad.
Hi, my pleasure.
So we're going to be talking about the topic that keeps itself alive week after week, and that is the recent mafia state drama that has been going on with Sedat Peker and the finger he's pointing at any number of high-ranking Turkish government officials, whether it's Interior Minister Süleyman Soylu or even President Erdogan's son-in-law Berat Albayrak. In a previous podcast we hosted at Evolve, there was a conversation that framed this as almost in parallel to another similar scandal that broke out back in the 90s, and that was the Shishorlik incident in 1996. That was when, just for our listeners, that was when a road collision in Turkey had opened the door to wider revelations about cooperation between the mafia and the state against the PKK, which created a maelstrom for the government at the time. Fast forward almost 3 decades, and we're at a new scandal where a similar picture may be coming into view. To start this off, what I would like to ask you, Yektan, is with all of Pekar's allegations so far, can you explain to us the what you would consider the nature of the relationship in Turkey is between the state and these organized criminal elements?
This business, state and mafia business, is nothing new in Turkey. It's got a long history, actually. Ryan Gingeras has a very interesting study, is a research on this topic for the early Republican and late Ottoman period. But for our discussion, we don't need to go that far. I think if we talk about, if you want to if we want to talk about the historical background, I think it's a better idea to go back to the Cold War period to understand how this mafia state connection was framed and how it developed over time. It's like, first of all, before the Kurdish question, we had the communism threat for the Turkish state officials as a primary concern. So actually, this relationship was defined in that context in the late 60s and 70s. So in that sense, Turkey was not any different from many Latin American countries, many South American countries, or Greece or Italy. We can call that these Gladio type organizations. This basically what many people later called the deep state, derin devlet, who use mafia connections or tools to intimidate the left-wing opposition and the communists in the country. Later, some of these figures were used in the Turkish case against activists abroad, like the Armenian militia, Armenian militants from Asala, and even against Kurds. And of course, with the 1990s, I mean, this was this anti-communism thing is basically 60s, 70s. In the 80s, we have the Asala thing, this Armenian organizations, Armenian armed organizations attacking Turkish diplomats abroad. And 1990s, it was reshaped. This entire relationship was reshaped vis-a-vis the emergence of the Kurdish question and the guerrilla warfare in Turkey's Kurdistan region. So, and Susurluk was that Susurluk incident that you mentioned actually unraveled the dirty, so-called dirty relations between politicians, the police, the military, the Korucu, meaning the pro-state Kurdish tribesmen and notables in the Kurdish areas, and the mafia figures like Abdullah Çatlı at the time. And mafia, this kind of mafia traditionally had connections with Turkish right-wing political parties, most significantly, most importantly, with the MHP, which is part of the coalition today in Turkey, right? But I think one major break in this state mafia relations began to take shape after 2014, and it became a reality, or it became more visible, more salient, so to speak, particularly after the failed military coup in 2016. My argument about this new phase of mafia state relationships is that the roles have switched. So basically, mafia figures began behaving like politicians in Turkey, and Turkish politicians took the role of mafia. For instance, like, as so many examples to show this quite shocking situation in Turkey, which is, I don't think we can compare it with anywhere in this at this point. I mean, as I said before, the mafia state relations in Turkey was not unique. You could have compared it to many other countries or cases. But what's happening right now, or over the past 6-7 years, is quite peculiar to Turkey. In many respects, it's unique in the sense that if you look at the rhetoric, the language they use, I mean, if you look at what Sedat Peker says and how he says it, and compare it with how and what Süleyman Soylu, Ministry of Interior, responds to that and how he behaves, you cannot say who is the mafia boss here, who is the Ministry of Interior. And most recently, a very interesting book came out by Timur Soykan with the Turkish title Baronlar Savaşı, the Battle of Barons, meaning the drug bosses, so to speak. And what he shows there in many anecdotes is how, for instance, in one example, for instance, if you think about mafia state relations in general, you would see that, like, okay, the state officials would use these mafia figures as tools to, for example, they might use them against their political, enemies of state, so to speak, or their political rivals. And in return, these mafia figures would be tolerated in their activities, in their criminal activities, right? And perhaps this relationship could evolve into the level that, like, sometimes mafia figures would provide drugs or women to politicians. You know what? Timur Soykan shows us that exactly the opposite is happening in the Turkish case. Now it's the officials who actually, a political figure who takes the role or duties of mafia, including, finding women for mafia.
So the politicians are becoming the godfathers in this case.
Exactly. And interestingly, as I said our previous podcast, it is very interesting that if you look at, I've been closely following the wars within these underground figures and their relations with the state officials, particularly over the past 2 years. And I'm not talking only about Sedat Peker. Even the rivals of Sedat Peker, because Sedat Peker has many rivals within the criminal world itself, and they all comment about how the state should be run and how it's not being done correctly today. How Turkey's politics is not doing. I mean, it's not in right hands, right? So their comments are quite legitimately political, whereas the politicians, the language of politicians, their connections, the way they do things, resemble us pretty much the mafia style. So, but the question here is why and how did we come to this point? But why is this happening?
So why is this happening actually, considering the Justice and Development Party, the AKP, had come to power in the beginning, promising to, among other things, to go after corruption, and then you fast forward to 2021, and they're front and center in this mafia state web, so to speak. I know you and I spoke about it before, the relationship between the Turkish far right, particularly the MHP, and Turkish mafia figures like Alaaddin Kakachi, who also came into the news recently by responding to Sedat Peker. But how did we reach this state of affair? Was it a byproduct of the AKP MHP front, or is there more to it than just the AKP aligning itself with another actor who's much more amiable towards being friends with mobsters?
Yeah. Thank you, Nick, for reminding Çakıcı, the case of Çakıcı. Let me briefly open a parenthesis here before responding to your question. Actually, a couple of months ago, Çakıcı targeted Kılıçdaroğlu, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, who is the leader of the main opposition party, CHP, and wrote a letter and threatening him openly, explicitly. And then the political establishment in Turkey actually defended him in his acts. So this is another example of how, mafia is behaving like political figures, and the Turkish state apparatus or the regime bloc today are gathering behind those mafia forces. Now, okay, let me go with your question, and I think we need to see that we have been, as of 2014. Let me explain what I mean by 2014. 2014 signaling or referring to the total collapse of the coalition between Erdogan and the Jemaat, the Gülenist movement. So it is a very crucial moment to understand what is happening today. First of all, we need to emphasize that Erdogan, despite him being a strong man, he has never been in power without the help of a coalition. He has always been a power rising above a coalition. So it was not only the pro-Erdogan forces that brought him to power, right? And from 2002 to 2010, it was pretty much increasingly the Jamaat people who were behind many of Erdogan's victories against his other political rivals, mostly Euro-Asianist Kemalists, right? And in return, they were, I mean, the roads within the bureaucracy was wide open for the Jamaat people to occupy. And they did a great job, actually, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. And they aggressively took over many crucial positions within the police force. They were already well organized, by the way. But Erdogan, the alliance with Erdogan and their victories further reinforced their predominance over many wings of state bureaucracy, especially in the police force, in intelligence, and as well as in judiciary, right? So what happened with the collapse of that connection is like, is Erdogan, on the one hand, two things. He lost the cadres or the bureaucrats with merit, bureaucrats who are well equipped to hold those positions. He lost all of them. That's one thing. And second thing, which was left behind, that coalition to Erdogan was paranoia. Paranoia in the sense that, so Gülenis became #1 enemy of the state. But this is such an interesting, such an unprecedented moment in Turkish and even in late Ottoman history, in the sense that a group within the Turkish Sunni constituency becoming enemy number one of state forces, the state, is unprecedented at this level. And what came with that is that now you didn't have a well-defined group over there which can be described as the enemies. But now enemies could be anywhere, even within your party, political party, even within your cabinet, even among your guards, even with your anywhere. So what happens there after that is that you need security. You look for security, and at the same time, you approach anyone and everyone with suspicion. Let me open a brief parenthesis here. Since 2016, the #1 main concern of Erdogan has never been the opposition, the legal opposition. His #1 concern has been keeping the regime bloc together, right?
Yes.
And relatedly, he did not trust his police. He didn't trust the police force. He didn't trust the military at all. He didn't even, fully trust the police force. So he came up with a backup, which is the Bekçi organization. So the street guards, right? And they're also another organization which kind of supposedly coordinates behind the doors this entire security business in Turkey and abroad. This is Sadat. right? But yet, losing the apt cadres and filling their positions with people who do not have the merit, who do not have the liabilities to keep those positions, with two things. One thing is that since loyalty came before merit, right? You now have an inept bureaucracy. Second thing, that bureaucracy had two major, once you have a okay, once you got rid of the Gülenis, by the way, we are talking about big numbers, even bigger numbers as you move towards higher echelons of bureaucracy. We're talking about 40% of, at least 40% of the generals in the military. Overall, we are talking about over 30% of bureaucracy. So, which means now there is a very mouth-watering opportunity over there for many groups to occupy these new positions. But second thing, you have a leadership which is quite paranoid about the state apparatus. So opportunity comes with fear. I mean, you are, because you could be a target as the person who were at your position before you, right? So what came after this is that, is first a decay in institutional capacities of bureaucracy, and later, which turned into a total collapse of these institutions and their coordination. And I think we are closer and closer, and some institutions actually came to that point, to functional death. That means those institutions, yes, they lost their qualities as institutions, but they still function. Let's say police force. It doesn't function as an institution anymore, but it still functions to arrest people, to do this, that.
Yeah.
But we are coming to the point that those institutions cannot even anymore function. A great example is the central bank. So the Turkish state institutions are borderline failing to function, right? And I mean, one should understand, for instance, one can understand the reaction of the admirals, for example, within this context. One can frame the letter by ex-diplomats within this context.
That was on the
one can understand
last night, correct?
Business people's reactions within this context. Today in Turkey, we're signing, I mean, or complaining about, let's not even protesting, complaining about the situation, especially in an organized manner, is taking a big risk. So those people, like admirals, like the ex-diplomats, or these business people, they are taking a big risk, and they think they have to take it because they are coming to the end. So making this long story short, we have a failing state apparatus. We have a paranoid leadership, and who did everything by not looking at the cost for the state apparatus, for the nation, for the Turkish population. He did everything to secure his seat as a one-man person rule, to keep that position, keep his position as a one-man rule. So, so within this context, mafia figures, even like tiny like bits of organized power, or any organization becomes very significant. And also, Pecker's revelations show us that this current government, or people within the current government, use these mafia figures not in specific issues like rivals against their rivals, or against, they use them in anything and everything. They use them against their rivals within the party. I mean, in everything. So that also, like, as points to this new kind of relationship between mafia and the state officials.
And, there does, through all of this, one thing I think that's really absolutely stood out has been the almost paralysis in terms of responses from the ruling government. Of course, we have Soylu. He's filed his criminal complaint. He's gotten into he's gotten into an insult throwing contest with Pekkar. But Erdogan himself has been very quiet on all of this. He only commented on it fairly recently, where he compared combating organized crime to combating terrorists. He said something along the lines of they're the same kind of venomous snake, but the response has still been like very muted. For example, it's also so uncharacteristic, considering in any other kind of case of dissent, even from within, we saw them quick to act. Like you mentioned the admirals who wrote their letter about a month ago, and including one of the authors of the Blue Homeland Doctrine. They were quickly condemned. They were called coup plotters. They were arrested briefly, and you can go even further back to other corruption allegations being thrown against Erdogan's government, like the 2013 investigation that, of course, we're still living with the ghosts of that one through the Halkbank case. But, that precipitated what you mentioned in terms of the collapse between the AKP Gülenist alliance. So, taking that willingness to confront their foes like that, and then taking this kind of like silence in the face of what are allegations that are taking on a life of their own, that Pekkar is lobbying at, again, like very high-ranking AKP members. What do you read from this slowness or this silence from Erdogan and his his officials, his inner circle? How do you read that?
Great question. Actually, by now we have many cases to make sense out of Erdogan's silences. Actually, his silence always measures how precarious his position as a single man, keeping the bloc together, keeping the ruling bloc together. So, as I said before, his major concern is to keep together his party, groups within his party, the MHP, and other components, which are not like necessarily political parties, but groups, like some sections of these Euro-Asianist Kemalists, some sections of Turkish Islamists, some sections of other different versions of nationalists. So that is the primary concern for him. And here too, he wants to see who says what. Look, let me give you another example. When he was quite silent for a long time, immediately after the March 31st elections, when the AKP candidate lost against İmamoğlu in Istanbul, right? And then another very curious moment of silence came when his son-in-law, Berat Albayrak, either resigned or, according to the palace, who was excused from the position in November 2020. So here too, he looks around, wants to see who's on whose side. And interestingly enough, what we have been seeing so far, which can change any moment, by the way, is that Süleyman Soylu, despite this mounting evidence about unprecedented corruption and criminal activities he's involved in, he managed to have, maybe to force Erdogan's men behind him. So are they doing that willingly? Not necessarily. But I think they feel obliged. So one should realize that this regime, as I said before, has become more and more fragile over time since the failed coup in 2016. But as of Berat Albayrak's resignation, it has been in a process of collapse, crumbling. I think crumbling is the right word, in the sense that it's not collapsing, it's in a process of collapse, but meanwhile losing pieces, right? So another interesting thing that this recent, but before that, so it is curious to see that since November 2020, which is resignation of Berat Albayrak, we have seen scandals and crises popping up one after another, non-stop, right? And with an increasing frequency. I mean, before we had, let's say, one big crisis for every month. Then it came to every week, today, and now within hours, many crises. So, and you see this tendency to overcome crisis with creating new crisis. That's the old habit. But this new situation is that now things are out of control. That many of these crises burst out because there is a leak of information within the ruling bloc. Basically, what it says is something is simmering there, and you see the vapor coming out of it. And soon it will start boiling hard, and we see that happening.
And the volcano goes off.
Exactly. And I think Erdogan is sharing many other figures in history who play this strong man thing. They seem to be very strong, and they're oftentimes very paranoid about their people around them. And interestingly, on paper, in the public opinion, they do everything. But in practice, people around him, or these middle person, or these mid-level bureaucrats, do things seemingly in support of this, the cult of personality, which actually undermines his authority. Another great example is now we are seeing in Turkey. And the final thing I need to add here is and so in this entire story of crisis after crisis, of course, what we call regime bloc doesn't stay as it is all the time. I mean, because every crisis comes with a reshuffling of this bloc to the level of this this the bondage between the cliques within the regime bloc weakens, and so to speak, they become like, kind of, they melt and they become like liquid-like. They become like liquid, in the sense that you cannot say anymore who's man. You see what I'm saying? So for a long time, who would expect that Peker would come out with revelations, with confessions, with so many stories full of scandals, and Süleyman and that Minister of Interior, who was believed to be his patron within the state, would become the #1 target of those, right? And who would think that the journalists who were the closest to Süleyman Soylu would be targeted by Süleyman Soylu himself? And who would think that Mehmet Ağar, who was thought to be like, the man behind Süleyman Soylu, would make a statement which actually implicitly was kind of harming Süleyman Soylu? And who would think that Berat Albayrak and Süleyman Soylu would find themselves on the same camp against somebody? So that makes everything for Erdogan even more difficult, in the sense that he is now trying to be the captain of a ship
that is sinking,
loaded with, not only sinking, loaded with liquid, some kind of liquid, but that liquid is not sealed. It's not put in containers. It's free. So it flows to the direction that puts the ship in further jeopardy. So that is further risk. So this, continuous reshuffling of the regime bloc throughout this story, history of recent crisis, had an impact, and now we see the outcome of that. So it is becoming more and more difficult even to talk about cliques within the state apparatus, because they are melting down. They are not solid anymore. And this is, I think, when opportunity and fear comes together, and they become, and the subjects are exposed to both, the possibility of benefiting and the fear of loss. And by the way, when I mean loss, it means total loss. It's a matter of seconds, or sometimes, minutes, for somebody to fall from the top to the very bottom. So these journalists who were these 3 journalists who've been actually, again, a video, I don't know, probably you've seen that, but no need to go into details. But the thing is, they were they were the most aggressive pro-regime and pro-Süleyman Soylu figures. And today, the police raided their homes, and there are also rumors that one of them is already, one of those journalist brothers is already out of Turkey. I don't know. It needs to be yet confirmed. So yeah, this is such a political climate. It is this kind of a political climate ongoing in Turkey today.
So as the state kind of like takes on this shape, almost like the serpent eating its own tail by the
Yeah.
sound of it, as these disagreements and these factions begin to unravel, it does lend to this idea of a lot of instability, really throughout the regime.
Yeah.
And it does, maybe in my mind, it seems to fuel some of the interest that has been directed at Pekar's claims, because of course, Pekar is not a new figure. He was prominent. He was around since the 1990s. He was arrested a number of times through the early AKP years, and then he first came into like big public focus, as far as I know, during the Ergenekon trials, which was again concocted by during the days of the AKP Gulen partnership. And just a couple years after that, he's organizing nationalist rallies. A few more years later, Milliyet names him most charitable businessman in Turkey, and now here he is.
The
In
new enemy of state, the new enemy of
the new
state.
enemy of
So
the
the
state,
Gülenists are now out.
the Gulen in Dubai, basically. he
Worse, probably worse. I mean, we don't know. I mean, we don't know where this thing is going to end up.
Yeah,
Another thing, yeah.
please go ahead.
I mean, another thing is like, many says, I mean, many critics, especially many pundits in Turkey, or many pundits who, analysts who follow Turkey closely, think that they find it curious that he has not targeted Erdogan yet. He has not targeted the chief of intelligence. He has not targeted, Hakan Fidan. He has not targeted Hulusi Akar. Actually, if you look at this picture, one can say that he has the axe in his hand. He is hitting the body of a tree, but what shakes the most is the top.
And
right?
Yes. And that's just it. It's like, the laundry list could just be getting longer at this point. I mean, every week now we've gotten a video out, 6 million views on average for each one. So, clearly and also it's even setting the terms of the political conversation, since now it's breaking down in some ways to what, the AKP government saying the opposition is playing dirty politics by trusting a mobster without actually refuting any of the claims or committing to investigation. And then, of course, the opposition and continually asking these questions and taking Pekar's allegations for their own use. Of course, you look like you have something to say, Yektan. Well,
dear Nick, today in Turkey is not. I mean, the big question is like, how politicians trust a mobster. It's the other way around. Like there are like so many. I've seen so many polls. People trust Peker. Like, I mean, my observation is that probably 80% of the public in Turkey find Peker more trustworthy than Minister of Interior. So the question is today is the other way around in Turkey. How could a mafia figure would trust state anymore?
So, well, with that question though, it leads to that actually leads to the last thought that I have in my mind that I'd like to ask you about too, is like, what does that say to you then at this point, where the state is obviously in some state of crisis, the economy's in a crisis, the pandemic is still out there, and now people are trusting dubious character, to say the least. They're trusting a mobster over their president or over government officials. What are the implications of all of this to you? Like, do you think it's going to actually translate into like further political damage to the regime? Do you think it's just going to accelerate any trend there, or do you think that Erdogan, Erdogan will find some way to basically come out on top and use this to his advantage, as we know he's done in the past?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is no way that that this incident, this scandal would not leave major marks and on the regime's credibility or prestige, and further, also it will definitely lead to a significant loss of blood in terms of, yes, they might survive this, they will probably survive it in one way or another, but it will come with a cost, a dear cost. And the thing is, we are back to the same the cycle. So they will survive it, but they will create the potentials of even a bigger upcoming crisis. So let me make it short. The regime in Turkey today is kind of in a vegetative state right now. It is in the course of collapse. It's crumbling. One cannot say today or tomorrow, and how. Those are the real questions. But I think, I mean, when I used to say this 2016, 2017, it was not a very popular idea. But right now, I think there is almost agreement that Turkey is not only in a process of total collapse, but not only the political regime, but the Turkish political system is already altogether at the brink of a total collapse, which might actually have impact also on opposition. Because, yeah, I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, Kaan, I'm willing to bet that with the way things are going right now, we're going to seeing another one of Pekar's videos sooner rather than later.
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow. So far, he's been pretty on point with it.
And he's going to be responding to Minister of Interior, who, I mean, believe it or not, who accused him for hiding behind or hiding inside or behind
his wife's underwear.
His wife's underwear. I mean, this is the political language right now, and so quote unquote, this mafia figure, mobster figure will respond to that, and believe me, probably it's going to sound more political than, or more politically correct than
the actual minister. It's literally devolving into almost like a political rap battle. Yeah. If I could put it in, those kind of terms. But, the saga is going to go on. And as that happens, I look forward to having you back on here to give us your thoughts and help us break down what might happen next and how to make sense of all the chaos and confusion of the moment.
Yeah, my pleasure, anytime. And yeah, we will all together see how this entire saga or this thriller will, so to speak, unfold in the future. But I think Turkey is on the eve of very radical political developments. That is so obvious. The time is ticking. One cannot say how, when, but it becomes more and more obvious is that the regime bloc itself, or the base of the current regime, will be the sites of the collapse. That and the sites of the battle, so to speak. And of course, with consequences on the rest of Turkish politics or people in Turkey, and there is the possibility of another group. I mean, Turkey is in such a Turkish politics is, and the state apparatus and Turkish politics is in such a situation right now, is that even the most unthinkable radical extreme scenarios sound very
The black swans are suddenly becoming much more plausible.
plausible. I mean, not necessarily likely,
Guaranteed.
but you wouldn't be shocked to see a quite radical group, clique, circle within the today's regime bloc seizing the power. Or the same applies for, it may not be as likely, but the same applies for the opposition. You might see a quite radical and unexpected movement, person, circle, group, using this potential, mobilizing this potential, and perhaps even coming to power. These are all possibilities. So we are looking at a very broad continuum.
And that's the almost that's a foreboding element of all of this. Actually, really is just now that as I mentioned, the black swans are not guaranteed, but they're becoming more plausible, and just really the unpredictability of the situation does raise a lot of hairs on the back of the necks, not just in Turkey, but it should probably be raising more in countries that are observing it, and really what those kind of implications would be going forward. But with that being said, these are going to be questions that I look forward to encountering as they emerge, and having you back on to give your thoughts about. So Yektan, thank you very much for taking the time to come back to Turkey Abroad.
As always, Nico, my pleasure.
My name is Nicholas Morgan, and this is Turkey Abroad.